The Macube 310P from DeepCool looks pretty nice with its minimalistic design, but is it any good? Let's find out. What's up everyone, Eric here and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. For those of you who are new to the channel, I review and test PC cases, CPU coolers, and PC case fans. So if you end up liking this video, can you please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel? It helps a lot. I will have timestamps down in the description so you can jump to whatever interests you, but I do recommend you watch the whole review. Now before I get into this overview, just to have full disclosure, DeepCool did send me over this case to review, but as always, all the opinions expressed in this video are mine. I'm going to start off the overview going over the Macube lineup from DeepCool. The Macube 310P is the middle child in DeepCool's Macube lineup and has an MSRP of $80 US, with the Macube 550 being the big brother and the 110 being the youngest. Now the 310P does have a twin, that being the 310, with the major difference being the top of the 310 is not perforated. Okay then, the dimensions of the Macube 310P are 49.4 centimeters high by 22.8 centimeters wide by 43.5 centimeters deep. DeepCool does provide a small bag that has all the screws and fittings in it. There are also some zip ties. There is something called up as child safety locks, but the included manual doesn't indicate or show how to use them, so I don't fully understand what they do or how they work. Now taking a look at the case itself, the 310P has a steel front panel. This panel can be easily removed by pulling the bottom of the panel away from the chassis. Now the front I/O is not attached to the front panel, so you don't have to worry about damaging any of the cables when removing the front panel. Taking a closer look at the panel, the only air intake for this panel are small strips along the sides of the panel. The panel is held in by a plastic surround that's on the inside of the panel. Now looking back at the chassis, we see room for up to 3 120mm fans. Moving along to the top of the case, we see the front I/O. There are separate ports for the front audio out and microphone. There are 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, as well as a restart and power button. The top of the 310P is also a panel and it can be easily removed by simply just lifting the panel up. This panel has a plastic surround on the inside of the panel similar to the front panel, but this plastic surround has a large dust filter built into it. Looking back at the top of the chassis, there is room for 3 more 320mm fans. Moving to the rear of the case, we see the rear I/O location, 1 120mm pre-installed exhaust fan. There are 7 horizontal expansion slots, all with reusable covers. There is also a metal cover covering the expansion slot screws. And finally at the bottom, we see the power supply location. Taking a look at the bottom of the case, there are 4 plastic feet. These feet give only 14mm of ventilation for the power supply, so it's probably not a good idea to put this case onto carpet. These feet do have foam pads on them to help stop the case from sliding around. There is also a removable dust filter for the power supply, but you will need to tilt the case onto its side to actually access this filter. Moving on to the right side of the case, there is a steel side panel. This side panel is completely toolless, so to remove the right side panel, simply tilt the panel back using the pull tab at the rear of the case and lift it away. This side panel is a bent sheet of steel with some okay sized grooves in it. Moving along to the left side of the case, the left side panel is tempered glass. Like the right side panel, this glass panel is toolless. So to remove the glass panel, simply tilt the panel back using the handle on the glass and lift it away. This glass panel is 4mm tempered glass. Now I'm not sure how well the camera is picking this up, but the glass does have a slight tint to it. And that's it for the exterior of the case. Now before I move to the interior of the case, if you like what I'm doing here, can you please hit that like button? And if you really like what I'm doing here, can you please use the Amazon Associates links that are in the description? All you need to do is click on the link that suits your location and then add an item or items to your cart and order them. By doing this, the channel will get a small kickback at no extra cost to you. Okay, with that out of the way, looking at the inside of the case, there is a basement. There are no ventilation holes along the top of this shroud, but there are 2 cutouts for running cables and 1 large cutout at the front. Taking a look at the motherboard tray, there are 2 cutouts along the top of the motherboard tray for the EPS cables and fan cables, but most of your cables will be running through the 3 vertical cutouts located at the front of the case. There is also a GPU support bracket to help with those larger, thicker video cards. Okay, the Macube 310P does support mini ITX, micro ATX and ATX motherboards. The maximum GPU length is 390 millimeters, but that will be cut down if you install fans at the front, and will be cut down even more if you go with a front-mounted radiator. The max CPU cooler height of the 310P is 160 millimeters. Okay, turning the case around to look at the backside of the motherboard tray. There is up to 30 millimeters given behind the motherboard tray for cable management, thanks to the design of the side panel. There are a number of cable tie-offs and 2 Velcro straps, again to help with cable management. There are also 2 2.5-inch SSD sleds and a PWM fan connector. Moving on to the basement, we see a drive cage. This drive cage can hold 2 2.5-inch drives or 2 3.5-inch drives, or one of each. This cage can be easily moved. To move the cage, all you need to do is loosen the 4 screws on the bottom of the case, then slide the cage to your desired location, and then retighten the screws. With the cage in its stock configuration, there was 210 millimeters given for the power supply and cables. Then with the cage in its frontmost position, there is 225 millimeters for the power supply and cables. And with the cage in its backmost position, there was 205 millimeters for the power supply and cables. Now I did try removing the drive cage, but it didn't want to come out nicely, so I ended up just leaving it in there. And that brings us to the cooling options for the Macube 310P. Its stock configuration has only one 120mm pre-installed fan at the rear, and this is as an exhaust. This fan has a 3-pin fan connector and a Molex connector. Why there's still fans with Molex connectors in 2022, I do not know. Anyways, the chassis can support up to 7 120mm fans. That's 3 fans at the front, 3 fans along the top, and 1 fan at the rear. Now if you prefer having 140mm fans, then you can have up to 4. That's 2 fans at the front and 2 fans along the top. So for radiator support, you can have up to a 360 or a 280mm radiator at the front, and or a 120mm at the rear. And that's it for this overview. Now before I get onto my build notes, if you are finding this video helpful, you may want to check out some of my other case reviews. I'll link a card above to the playlist, and I'll also have the playlist linked down in the description. Okay, my build notes. Starting off with cable management, I was able to get the non-modular power supply as well as all the cable extensions in with really no issues whatsoever. It was really easy to fit everything in and keep it nice and flat to the motherboard tray, which means I had no issues getting the right side panel on when I was all done. Now it is really nice that DeepCool provides a PWM fan hub, but I do find it odd that they provide the fan hub when they only provide one non-PWM fan. Or is that just me? Now about that pre-installed fan, there are no identifying marks on it whatsoever, but I did do some manual RPM checks on the fan. So at 12 volts, this fan's RPM was around 1080-ish, and the minimum RPM was around 410-ish, and that was at 3.5 volts. Below 3.5 volts, the fan would just stop spinning. Now with that being said, this fan doesn't have much airflow, which we'll see in the temperature testing. Now on the other hand, the built-in GPU support bracket is really nice. It's really easy to adjust and has a really good range of motion, so getting it where you need it is actually pretty simple. Now for the card that I use for this testing, it is completely overkill, but for some of those more big boy coolers, it will definitely help with GPU sag. So yeah, I had no real issues building in this case. The build quality is pretty okay. I had no issues with cable management. Everything fit real easy. It looks really nice. Everything fits. So yeah, build notes, pretty simple stuff. Nothing really out of the ordinary. So on to the temperature testing then. Now, if you do have any questions on how I test the cases, please check out my case testing methodology video. I'll have a card along the top, and I'll also have it linked down in the description. Starting off with the CPU workload testing. With only the stock fan running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 72.3 C. Then when I removed the front and top panels, the average CPU temperature went down to 70 C. Then with the stock fan at the rear, 1 top exhaust and 3 front intakes, the average CPU temperature was 69.5 C. With the stock fan at the rear and 3 top exhaust fans, the average CPU temperature was the same at 69.5 C. Then in the fan normalized configuration, the average CPU temperature was 67.9 C. So having an even pressured fan configuration seems to work best for the CPU. Now looking at the game temperature testing, With just the stock fan running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was 49.5 C, and the average GPU temperature was 81.4 C, which is definitely getting up there for the GPU temperature. Then with the stock fan at the rear, 1 top exhaust fan and 3 front intake fans, the average CPU temperature dropped to 47.5 C, with the average GPU temperature at 67 C. So better, but not great. When I removed the front and top panels with just the stock fan running at full speed, the average CPU temperature was at 45.4 C, and the average GPU temperature was at 75.4 C. So the panels are definitely choking the GPU. With the fan normalized configuration, the average CPU temperature was 44 C, with the average GPU temperature being 75.3 C. Then with the stock fan at the rear and 3 top exhaust fans, the average CPU temperature was 46.7 C, with the average GPU temperature being 68.1 C. So a negative pressure fan configuration seems to work best for the GPU. Now when comparing the 310P's stock configuration to all the other cases I've tested, starting with the sound level readings, it's at the top of the chart tying the 110. Now these are the same fans between the 110 and the 310P, so this does make sense. Now moving on to the CPU workload test, the 310P is just above the spec delta on this chart. In the game testing, it's between the R1 and the H1M, which again kind of makes sense because all these cases do have only 1 fan. Moving along to the noise equalized testing. So all the cases have been noise equalized to 35 dBA, but this case doesn't reach 35 dBA, so I'm just running it at full speed. In the CPU workload test, it's 3rd from the bottom. And in the noise equalized game testing, the 310P is 2nd from the bottom, beating out its little brother, the 110. Moving on to the fan normalized testing, the sound level of the 310P with the 4 Arctic P12 fans was 38 dBA, which has it topping the chart. So the 310P is a quiet case. But in the CPU workload test, the Macube 310P is 2nd from the bottom, pretty much tying the spec delta. Then in the game testing, the 310P is on the bottom side of the chart. So what do I think of the Macube 310P from DeepCool? Now simply put, it's a beautiful, okay built case with okay airflow. And that okay airflow does have an asterisk to it. Now I really do like that all the panels are toolless and it is really easy to build in. Now for that asterisk on the airflow, now I understand that the 310P didn't perform well in the stock or fan normalized testing, so you do definitely need to buy more fans for this case, which then does increase the overall price for the case. But based off my testing, you definitely will want to actually have this case running in a negative pressure system or negative pressure configuration. And that will have the GPU temperatures being pretty okay. Now the CPU temperatures are not great in negative pressure, but the case is definitely usable or more usable in negative pressure than equal or positive pressure. And I do understand saying that to have the case in negative pressure could have increased dust buildup, but the filtering in this case is pretty okay, so I don't think it'd be that big of a deal. Now I'm pretty sure what I'm talking about here will only work with the 310P, because I'm pretty sure that the 310, just the base 310 that doesn't have the perforations along the top, is pretty much a lost cause. So if you do like the looks of this case, make sure you get the 310P and run it in a negative pressure system, because yes, I understand the case looks great, so if you like the look of it, that's kind of the way you're going to have to run it. Well, that's all I got for this one. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching and you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. There's also the HFG Discord server. I post all the charts of all my cases, CPU coolers, and fans up on there. So it's a great place to actually get a lot of good information on if you're picking new stuff out for your next system. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.